Welcome back. Every country on Earth owes money. The US, over $38 trillion. Japan, more than 200% of its entire economy. Even tiny Iceland is lugging around a national IOU. Here's the weird part. If everyone's in debt, who exactly is on the other side of the receipt? Mars, Jeff Bezos, or are aliens collecting rent? That's the trillion-dollar paradox, and it sparks the kind of questions you've probably had but never got clear answers to. Today we're breaking open the trillion-dollar questions. Why is every country on Earth drowning in debt? And who's actually collecting the bill? If governments control the printing press, why can't they just create unlimited money and erase their debt? How can countries borrow trillions without ever paying it off, while you would get cut off for missing one credit card payment? And is it even possible for a country to be truly debt-free, or is debt just built into the system? So buckle up. By the end of this video, you'll know who really holds the world's IOUs, why debt never truly goes away, and whether the global finance system is a house of cards or a well-rehearsed circus act. Let's strip away the jargon. So what is the national debt? In short, national debt is the total amount a government owes to the people it is borrowed from. That's it. Imagine you owe money on your credit card. Now scale that up to an entire country. Same idea, bigger consequences. But here's the twist. Governments don't borrow from shady loan sharks and dark alleys. They borrow through something called bonds, which are basically IOUs with interest. Here's how it works. 1. The government needs cash, say to build a highway. 2. It sells a bond, which is just a fancy certificate saying, lend us $100 and we'll pay you back with interest in 10 years. 3. Investors, from local pension funds to foreign governments, buy those bonds. Boom, that's debt. Think of bonds like gift cards, but in reverse. Instead of you giving Starbucks $50 today and drinking coffee later, you give the government $50 today, and they promise to give you back more coffee money in the future. Now, debt has two flavors: domestic debt, which is debt owed to your own citizens, and foreign debt owed to outsiders. Japan is the poster child for domestic debt. 90% of its $9 trillion debt is held by Japanese people themselves. Argentina, on the other hand, borrows a ton from foreign creditors, and when they can't pay, hello default. Greece, same story in 2010. The bill came due, no one trusted them, and suddenly the entire Eurozone had a migraine. And here's a number that stings. Last year, the US alone spent over $1 trillion just on interest payments. That's more than its entire defense budget. For everyday people, that's like paying more in credit card interest than your rent, groceries, and Netflix combined. So, national debt is like two types of borrowing: owing your roommate money, which is awkward but survivable, and owing the mafia money, where you miss one payment and it's not survivable. But unlike you, governments almost never pay off their debt in full. They just refinance it forever. This is why comparing national debt to your personal credit card is both useful and misleading. Your bank will cut you off if you max out, but the US, it's been borrowing nonstop since 1776, and every year it just asks Congress to raise the limit. So, in plain English, national debt is a country's running tab at the world's bar, and the bartender just keeps on pouring. So, if every country owes money, who exactly are they borrowing from? Spoiler, it's not aliens or Jeff Bezos' secret vault. The lenders are surprisingly ordinary and a little terrifying. A huge chunk of government debt is actually held by its own citizens. When you buy a government savings bond, you're literally lending money to your country. Grandma's retirement fund? Packed with them. In the US, about 2/3 of its debt is owed internally to Americans themselves. Which means if Uncle Sam ever defaulted, it wouldn't just be some abstract headline, it would be your pension and your mutual fund that take the hit. Then there are foreign governments. This is where things get spicy. The US owes over $730 billion to China and over $1.15 trillion to Japan. But none of this means that these countries own America. Buying US debt is basically the global version of putting money into a super safe savings account. They lend the money, the US pays interest, and everybody moves on with their day. Still, the idea of a rival like China sitting on hundreds of billions in American IOUs always makes headlines, even if in reality, it's just part of how the world's financial system keeps humming along. And then come the institutions, banks, hedge funds, and the global giants like the IMF or World Bank. These guys act like financial doctors, but instead of handing out medicine, they give you a loan and tell you to clean up your habits. That's what happened to Greece in 2010. The IMF stepped in with cash, but the deal came with austerity measures, which is just a nicer way of saying Greece had to cut spending, raise taxes, and tighten its belt in ways that hit everyday people really hard. Zooming out, the pattern becomes clear. Japan mostly owns money to itself, which is why it can survive with debt over 200% of GDP. Argentina mostly owes foreigners, which is why it defaults every other decade like it's a national sport. Greece scared half of Europe when investors lost trust and demanded sky-high interest rates. Even the UK, one of the richest economies on earth, has almost half its debt owned by overseas investors, which means every financial wobble ripples far beyond London. And then there's China, which not only lends to the US, but also doles out loans worldwide through its Belt and Road Initiative, sometimes lending to countries that are already broke, like giving your buddy with 3 maxed out credit cards another credit card. So the fun analogy is this. Borrowing from your mom means she'll nag you, but eventually forgive. Borrowing money from the mob means you better have cash ready or else. Governments do both at the same time, and the mix of who they borrow from determines how fragile they are. Sometimes it's pensions, sometimes it's Wall Street, sometimes it's China, and sometimes it's the IMF standing over your shoulder with a calculator. So the next time you hear that a country owes hundreds of billions, remember, it's not one giant bill sitting in one person's mailbox. It's a tangled web of citizens, foreign powers, banks, and institutions, all holding a piece of the IOU pie. Here's the real head-scratcher. If countries already owe trillions, how do they keep borrowing more without hitting a wall? If you max out a credit card, the bank laughs and cuts you off. Governments, on the other hand, roll over debt like pros. What does that mean? Rolling over simply means instead of paying off old loans in full, they borrow new money to replace the old ones. It's like refinancing your mortgage every few years and never actually clearing the balance. That's national debt management in a nutshell. And weirdly enough, it works. Until it doesn't. And before you wonder, no, governments can't just print money and wipe out their debt. The printing press isn't a cheat code. When a country creates too much money, prices explode. It's like diluting orange juice with water. The more water you add, the weaker it gets. Flood the economy with fresh money, and the currency itself starts losing value. And if the money you're using to pay the debt is shrinking in real value every day, lenders panic and stop lending altogether. That's why printing your way out of debt usually ends in inflation, crisis, or both. So instead, governments rely on confidence. Think of the U.S. Treasury as the world's ultimate money magnet. Every time bonds mature, the government issues new ones, and investors line up to buy them. Why? Because U.S. debt is seen as the safest asset on the planet. Investors would rather park their cash with Washington at 2% interest than risk it in a shaky stock market. It's like lending money to the world's worst shopaholic, but knowing they'll always have a job and can always pay at least the interest. Japan is another great example. With debt over 200% of GDP, you'd expect the whole system to collapse. Instead, Japanese investors happily keep lending to their own government because they trust it won't default. Meanwhile, Argentina, which has defaulted 9 times in 2 centuries, has the financial reputation of that one friend who always promises to pay you back next week, but somehow never does. Investors charge them sky-high interest, or refuse to lend at all, which is why Argentina keeps getting locked out of markets. Here's a funny analogy. Debt rollover is like juggling flaming torches. As long as you keep the rhythm, the show looks impressive. Drop one of those torches, and suddenly the tent is on fire. Countries like the US and Japan have perfected the act. Countries like Sri Lanka and Lebanon, not so much. They dropped the torches, and the economy went up in flames. And let's not forget interest rates. When they're low, governments can borrow endlessly at bargain prices, but when rates rise, the cost of rolling over balloons. So the short answer is, countries keep borrowing because investors keep lending. As long as people believe the government can and will pay interest, the system continues. The debt never really disappears. It just shapeshifts, passed from one bondholder to the next. It's not like paying off your student loans. It's more like a financial hot potato that never leaves the game. The confidence that governments can keep juggling is what keeps the entire circus running. So far, debt sounds almost magical. Countries borrow forever, roll it over, and keep the circus act going. But here's the ugly truth. Debt only works as long as people believe you'll eventually pay. The moment investors lose faith, the whole show collapses. Debt gets dangerous when interest rates spike, when borrowing costs skyrocket, and when lenders start saying, maybe you're not good for it. Think of it like dating. As long as your reputation is clean, everyone swipes right. But one cheating scandal, or in this case, one missed payment, and suddenly nobody wants to match with you. Greece in 2010 is the poster child. Investors realized Greece had been cooking the books, hiding the true scale of its deficits. Overnight, lenders demanded insane interest rates. Suddenly, Greece couldn't roll over its debt anymore. Cue IMF bailouts, brutal austerity, and streets filled with protests. The joke was that Greece owed more money than its entire economy could even produce, which is like trying to pay off a mansion with your summer job at Starbucks. Lebanon in 2020 faced a similar meltdown. The government had borrowed so much that when lenders pulled back, the currency collapsed. Banks froze deposits, and people literally stormed ATMs to get their own money out. Sri Lanka in 2022, same playbook. Debt-fueled infrastructure projects, falling revenue, and then a foreign debt crisis that sparked mass protests and even the president fleeing the country. What makes these crises brutal is the spiral. First, borrowing gets expensive. Then the government raises taxes or cuts spending to reassure investors. But that slows the economy, which makes debt even harder to pay. It's like trying to fix your credit score by selling your car. Sure, you've got less debt, but now you can't get to work. Now here's the satire. Governments are actually better at debt rollover than most of us with credit cards. But once they lose trust, it's game over. You can negotiate with Visa. You can't negotiate with millions of angry citizens whose savings just evaporated. At this point, you might be wondering, is national debt some ticking time bomb, or is it just the price of modern life? The answer is annoyingly simple. It's both. Debt is like fire. Controlled, it cooks your dinner. Uncontrolled, it burns your house down. When used well, debt is an engine for growth. Governments borrow to build highways, fund schools, launch satellites, and even subsidize internet infrastructure. That kind of borrowing pays off because it creates future wealth. Japan's Shinkansen bullet trains, funded partly by government debt. America's interstate highways? Same story. In those cases, every borrowed dollar is like an investment. You're planting seeds that will grow into bigger tax revenues later. But then there's bad debt. That's when governments borrow just to pay interest on old debt or to cover bloated spending without a plan for growth. Think of it like eating sugar for an energy boost. Sure, it feels good for a while, but then comes the crash. That was the case with Greece. It wasn't borrowing to build new industries, it was borrowing to cover pensions and salaries it couldn't afford. That's when debt turns toxic. Here's an analogy you'll actually feel in your stomach. Good debt is like steroids for an athlete. Used carefully, it boosts performance. Abuse it, and the body breaks down. Governments that use debt to build the future stay strong. Governments that binge on it for short-term survival end up in the ICU. No country truly lives without debt. Even resource-rich nations borrow because it smooths spending over time. It's like using a credit card not because you're broke, but because it's convenient, and maybe it earns you some airline miles. In fact, some of the richest countries in the world have the highest debt. Japan, as we mentioned, sits at over 200% of GDP. The US is at $38 trillion, and yet investors still treat them like safe havens. Why? Because trust matters more than numbers. So is debt bad? Not inherently. It's a necessary fuel for the modern economy, but like gasoline, it has to be handled carefully. Spill a little and you can keep driving. Spill a lot and you're holding a torch over a puddle. So the answer to the question of who really owns the world's IOUs is less dramatic than the conspiracy theories suggest, but a lot more interesting. It's not aliens, it's not one shadowy billionaire, it's us. Citizens, banks, pension funds, foreign governments, institutions. The debt is spread out like slices of a giant pie. In the U.S., most of that $38 trillion is held by Americans themselves through bonds and retirement accounts. In Japan, almost all of it is domestic, owed to Japanese households and institutions. In places like Argentina, it's foreigners holding the bag. And in countries under IMF programs, it's international institutions dictating the rules. In other words, countries don't really owe money to someone else, they owe it to a tangled mix of each other and to their own people. That's why debt isn't just an accounting problem, it's a political one. When governments borrow, they're effectively borrowing from their voters' future savings. When they default, it's often those same citizens who take the hit. So the global debt system is less like one person owing money to another, and more like a massive spider web of IOUs connecting everyone. Pull one string too hard, like Greece defaulting or Sri Lanka collapsing, and vibrations ripple across the whole web. Here's the moral. Debt is not going away. It's baked into how modern economies run. The real question isn't why is every country in debt? It's how do we keep trust in the system alive? Because once trust breaks, numbers on a spreadsheet turn into riots in the street.